Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right into one of the most hotly debated cultural and scientific topics out there right now, social psychologist Jonathan Haidt's viral thesis, The Anxious Generation. We are going to completely unpack his argument that a massive shift in how kids grow up has triggered a youth mental health crisis. And, just as importantly, we're going to dive impartially into the fierce, fascinating pushback his theory has sparked among academic researchers. So let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this with a really staggering number. 189%. That is the increase in self-harm hospital admissions among young girls in the US between 2010 and 2015. But percentages can sometimes kind of obscure the reality, so let's put that into perspective. In a typical high school of, say, 2,000 students, this essentially means going from one girl visiting the ER for self-harm in a year to 3 girls. That absolute change is the stark, real-world data point that literally kicked off a global search for answers.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the mental health crisis, move into the Great Rewiring, break down the foundational harms, explore the academic pushback, and wrap up with norms for the future.
All right, Section 1, the mental health crisis as a global phenomenon. We have to start with the undeniable trend that forced everyone to start asking questions.
According to Haidt, after years of things being relatively stable, youth mental health basically fell off a cliff in a very specific window, right between 2010 and 2012. And the wild thing is, this wasn't just isolated to the US. It was this synchronized international tidal wave of anxiety and depression across the Anglosphere, Europe, and other developed nations. Haidt's central argument is that this global spike perfectly aligned with one major cultural shift, the widespread adoption of smartphones and social media.
No, what's absolutely crucial to understand here is that this isn't just self-reported anxiety. We all know self-reporting can be skewed by a culture simply becoming more willing to talk about mental health, but we are talking about hard behavioral data. The baseline is hovering right around 100 admissions in 2010, and then it just rockets up to roughly 300 emergency room admissions by 2015.
And the impacts of this crisis are highly gendered. Haidt points out that girls are uniquely susceptible to the comparison traps and perfectionism of social media, which leads to those rising rates of internalizing disorders, body image issues, and self-harm. Boys, on the other hand, are experiencing something totally different. They're much more likely to retreat from the physical world into digital isolation. They substitute real-world risk and achievement with video game addiction and pornography, leading to intense social withdrawal and what's often called a failure to launch into adulthood.
Moving to Section 2, the Great Rewiring, from play to phones. So what exactly changed in the everyday lives of kids to trigger this?
Let's walk through the timeline. Think back to 2007, the iPhone drops, which obviously changed mobile computing forever. But the real game changer, according to Haidt, happened around 2010. That's when the front-facing camera became standard, and Instagram launched, creating this highly visual, continuous social feed. By 2012, the vast majority of teens had these devices. So right as an entire generation hit puberty, they were handed pocket-sized portals to an unregulated virtual universe. And exactly then, adolescent mental health dropped sharply.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core shift at the heart of the book, the transition from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood. Now, experts like Peter Gray have noted that free play was already declining back in the 80s and 90s because of parental safetyism, basically overprotecting kids from physical risks. But Haidt argues kids are anti-fragile. They actually need minor physical risks and face-to-face conflict to learn how to resolve issues and build psychological resilience. Instead, that physical play was restricted, and then completely replaced by a disembodied, isolated, algorithmic digital world.
Which brings us to Section 3, 4 foundational harms, or the developmental vacuum. How do these devices actually harm a developing brain?
Haidt argues they act as experience blockers, and he breaks this down into 4 foundational harms. First, social deprivation. The time teens spend socializing face-to-face has just plummeted, robbing them of crucial nonverbal learning. Second, sleep deprivation. Late-night screen use disrupts the restorative sleep that the developing prefrontal cortex absolutely needs. Third, attention fragmentation. Those constant algorithmic notifications hijack the brain's executive function, destroying a kid's capacity for deep focus. And fourth, addiction. Social media and games rely on variable reward schedules to intentionally stimulate dopamine pathways.
So what does that constant dopamine hit actually do over time? Well, heavy digital users build up a tolerance, leading to a state called anhedonia. It's basically an inability to find pleasure in normal, real-world activities. When a teenager's brain gets accustomed to the hyper-stimulating, perfectly engineered rewards of a screen, the slower, lower-stakes real world simply cannot compete. It's no wonder they experience acute withdrawal when separated from their devices.
Haidt sums up this tragic irony with a really profound allegory. He says we completely overprotected our kids in the physical world, worrying about literally every scrape on the playground, while simultaneously underprotecting them digitally. We just left them to wander entirely unsupervised through the wild west of the virtual world. He calls this paradox, sending children to grow up on Mars, facing a broader spiritual degradation devoid of nature, meaning, and physical embodiment.
All right, let's pivot to Section 4, the academic pushback, correlation versus causation. Because this is science, it is absolutely critical we impartially explore the fierce pushback Haidt's narrative has received from the broader academic community.
So, leading developmental psychologists, researchers like Candace Odgers at UC Irvine, Andrew Przylski and Christopher Ferguson, they strongly criticize Haidt's thesis. Their main argument? Haidt is conflating correlation with causation. Basically, just because smartphone use and depression rose at the same time doesn't actually mean one caused the other. These critics warn that Haidt is cherry-picking data to fuel a moral panic, even comparing it to the 1950s hysteria that comic books were going to destroy the youth.
If you look at the two sides, the debate is really clear. Haidt focuses almost exclusively on a single culprit, smartphones and social media. But critics argue this is a massive distraction from larger systemic societal stressors. They point out that today's youth have grown up in the shadow of the 2008 financial crisis, the isolation of COVID-19, the looming threat of climate change, and ongoing systemic discrimination. To the critics, the kids are on their phones because they are distressed, not the other way around.
At the very heart of this academic debate is a tiny statistical number, a correlation coefficient, or R, of 0.15 between screen time and mental illness. Critics argue this effect size is minuscule, saying it's statistically equivalent to the effect of wearing glasses on your well-being. But Haidt counters that hard. He argues that while the individual effect looks small, on a massive population-wide level, an R of 0.15 is highly significant. He compares it to childhood lead exposure, an effect size small on paper, but devastating enough in reality to justify a massive national campaign to remove lead from our water.
Which leads us to Section 5, 4 norms for the future and collective action. Regardless of where you land on the academic debate, society is actively responding. Let's look at the actionable solutions emerging here.
Haidt recognizes parents are caught in a collective action trap, giving kids phones simply because they're terrified their child will be socially ostracized. To break this, he proposes 4 highly structured societal norms. 1. No smartphones before high school. Give them flip phones instead. 2. No social media before age 16. 3. Phone-free schools from the morning bell to the afternoon bell. And 4. More unsupervised free play in the real world to rebuild independence and resilience.
So how is this actually playing out? Well, society is actively fighting back against that collective action trap. We're seeing grassroots movements where parents are signing pacts to delay smartphones together. We're seeing sweeping state legislation, like California's AB 3216, mandating phone-free policies in public schools by 2026. And schools are adopting everything from lockable physical pouches to automated software to enforce these boundaries and just reclaim the classroom. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. As we navigate this incredibly complex intersection of tech, psychology, and society, we have to figure out how to balance essential digital literacy with the undeniable need for real-world development. The data clearly shows something profound has shifted in the experience of growing up. The question now is, how do we adapt? Are we ready to bring our children home from Mars? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.